for climate, for helping overcome the consequences of the Ukraine war, be it in the form of energy shortages and energy joint procurement schemes, for instance, as is being discussed, or to the food crisis and its effects and how to act on those, on the effects of the food crisis after Ukraine. So on trade and economic aspects, on development aspects, on energy, I mentioned, on the digital sphere, and how to put forward particular normative and specific normative frameworks that can also promote the European way of understanding the digital transition. So on the digital, on the green, on energy, on many aspects related to trade, there is still a dire need for the European Union to act strategically autonomously, strategically and autonomously, because it can be in line with what the European Union has always been, which is basically a normative power, an actor that helps bridge the deficiencies of this more geopolitical world, this more contested world, and thus all the other dimensions of strategic autonomy in the field of external action have become more relevant even than before the war in Ukraine. I'll leave it here for the first remarks, and then happy to engage in other aspects of the paper or the war in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I think you made it clear. EU is not yet, or does not have to aspire to become an autonomous actor for security and defense. There are other actors, and there are more and other pressing issues as well, where the EU can actually have an added value. And that basically now leads us to Anna and her paper on the conflict prevention question of things. Anna, you argue that in that field, the EU already has certain power and projects power. Maybe you can already, go a little bit further into that, and yeah, we can discuss then later also maybe more concretely what that means, for example, in Sahel, where the more geopolitical or geostrategic competition with Russia also comes to the forefront. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here today, but also more generally for inviting me to write that brief in the first place. When I was given the task to focus on conflict prevention and peace building, I found, not surprisingly, that there was very little written on this topic, and also the topic of strategic autonomy. And that obviously has to do, as it has been just already discussed, with the fact that strategic autonomy and that debate has narrowly focused on defense issues, and in particular understood in military terms. So what I try to do in the paper is to kind of balance this debate a bit more, and also show how the EU's real strengths lie in the area of peace building, and also argue that any vision of a strategic autonomy obviously should take this seriously. So I argue in the paper that despite the positive contribution that the EU has made in the areas of conflict prevention, peace building, mediation, not enough attention has been paid to the broader considerations regarding the links between strategic autonomy and the EU's normative commitment to promote peace and security beyond its borders. And I fear, and maybe we can discuss this later on, that the Ukrainian crisis, the war in Ukraine, will only exacerbate kind of some of these trends. Crucially, and I also want to make this clear, I don't argue that the EU should not improve its military capabilities, or that it shouldn't be forceful when defending its interests at the international level. Rather, that this should not be done by foregoing the civilian dimension and the civilian contribution of the EU to international security. I think that if we were to do this, this only undermines the kind of the distinctive role that the EU already plays in this area, but also its identity as a normative actor committed to the promotion of norms and values beyond its borders. And I think this is particularly important now, given that the EU's values are under attack in the continent. So I think, promoting peace and security and strengthening the EU's capabilities in conflict prevention, peace building, and mediation are very much in the EU's interest, and in the sense that it obviously is going to strengthen the promotion of the EU's values beyond its borders. As you were mentioning, the brief argues that the EU has a distinctive role and it has already strengths in this area, and I try to identify where the EU's added value lies, and identify 4 issues that I'm not going to go into detail now, we can discuss, but one of them is obviously the ability to deploy an integrated approach, and Paul has already mentioned some of these things in his presentation. Its commitment to multilateralism, to developing partnerships with other actors and at different levels. Thirdly, the relative kind of adaptability and flexibility to address new security threats, and for example, climate change has also been mentioned by Paul. And obviously, and I mentioned this a couple of times already, this normative approach that the EU has adopted, which has privileged non-coercive means, and also bottom-up approaches to conflict prevention and peace building. So I'm not saying that the EU is the only actor that kind of promotes this or that focuses on these 4 areas, but that taken together and in combination have allowed the EU to develop this unique identity as a security provider. And I think, given the current context, it's important that, the EU member states and the EU institutions continue to strengthen this profile. And I think only by strengthening this kind of unique identity, we can kind of ensure that the EU develops this strategic autonomy. So in the paper, I identify a number of shortcomings, some areas where there's kind of a space for concrete action to improve the EU's strategic autonomy in the area of conflict prevention and peace building. And I focus on 3 issues, interrelated issues. One is how to improve the EU's conflict prevention and peace building capabilities in key areas of engagement, those being mediation, resilience building, and civilian CSDP. Then I discuss how to improve coordination. So again, how to strengthen the implementation of integrated approach in this area. And thirdly, and I think more importantly, when it comes to conflict prevention and peace building, is how to ensure the buy-in from the member states. I think in the area of conflict prevention and peace building, this is slightly different from defense and kind of military capabilities, because here we already have most of the capabilities. They are at the member states' disposal, but what we're lacking is the political will from the EU member states to make them available to the EU, and to ensure that they are recruited on time, that the staff are well trained, and that there is enough resources available for mediation, for peace building, for conflict prevention. And this is where most of the problems have taken place in the past. So, for example, we have already strong pledges coming from the member states regarding, the need to provide high quality and well-trained staff, but those pledges have not been met in the past, and this has kind of prevented the EU from meeting the ambitions that it has set itself for in this area. It is interesting, I think, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, that the new strategic compass that was adopted in March, so obviously after this paper was written, already mentions that they need to launch this new civilian capability development initiative by 2024, so with a deadline of less than 2 years, where EU member states are going to assess capability needs, conduct capability gaps, and review periodically progress in this area. I mean, we have seen this in the past already, so this is not kind of a new revolutionary initiative, but I wonder whether the current context, the conflict in Ukraine is going to, to provide some momentum and provide an opportunity, for example, for these to actually, to come to fruition finally. So as I said, as well as kind of dealing with these key areas of engagement and providing some concrete recommendation on these 3 areas, I think the most important one has to do with this ensuring the member states' commitment. And in this regard, I argued that we should pursue 2 paths, parallel paths. On the one hand, strengthen the inclusiveness of the EU's initiatives, fostering engagement and dialogue from the member states, so the member states can learn from each other. Because at the moment we're seeing strong commitment on the part of a very small group of EU member states, but then a lot of this engagement from the other member states. So I think we need to ensure that the process is inclusive enough and that every EU member state is involved in these processes. For example, making use of the annual reviews on the implementation of the civilian compact. And then also, for example, we could look at very specific initiatives, for example, institutional reforms aim at fostering dialogue, as well as placing conflict prevention, peace building, and mediation at the center of EU external action, for instance, with the establishment of a dedicated council working group on conflict prevention and mediation. These ideas for more inclusivity should also be complemented with more flexibility. And I think Paul also has a lot of this in his paper. He can maybe also mention some of these things later on, trying to, for example, cater for the fact that obviously different member states have different interests. So then you could, for example, support the creation of specialized teams of experts or clusters of among some groups of member states, which could be incentivized through the use of the CFSP budget, or you could task an individual member state with particular tasks in the area of mediation. So I think we need to make more use of these different mechanisms to increase flexibility, so that you can combine the ambition with inclusive approaches. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. So these are some of the things that the brief mentions, that obviously try to enhance the EU's strategic autonomy in this area, where the EU has already shown a lot of strengths, where the EU has already built a unique identity. And I argue that developing the EU's peacebuilding capabilities, therefore, should not come as an afterthought. And I think this is particularly relevant in the current context, but that should be at the center of any discussion about strategic autonomy.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I see there are already a couple of questions in the chat. I would also open for that in a minute, but I actually have a follow-up question a little bit to both of you. You mentioned already the strategic concept, Anna, but I wonder, the strategic division you described, Paul, which is clearly a matter and also an obstacle maybe to more progress or more effective decision making, let's say, with regards to security and defense. Do you think the strategic concepts of the EU, and also now maybe with the NATO concept at hand, do you think the clear division of labor, which is now put into place again, and maybe the effect that it might have in stopping the confusion about the ambition of strategic autonomy, will that enhance a little bit the decision-making process, or further steps into more ambitious decision-making with regards to foreign and security, in the fields then that Anna has described, where the EU actually has an added value? Are we progressing a little bit with the documents at hand, and also with the discussion we're having, Paul?
Yeah, I would say that the strategic compass was a necessary endeavor and a necessary document. I mean, at the beginning, it's true that it was conceived probably as a way to start or help overcome these strategic differences between the member states, the strategic cultures among member states, to come together with a shared definition of threats, with a shared definition of the role of the EU in security and defense, and so on and so forth. This was the ambition of the document at the very beginning, and as it was on the one hand, a reflection exercise, on the other hand, an operational exercise by saying, okay, these are our priorities, this is the way we can act together, this is our roadmap for getting there. So in a very divisive area for the European Union, which is security and defense, and also an area where most initiatives before the strategic compass have been already devised and are already available but have never been used, such as the battle groups. This reflection was necessary. Of course, the fact that the compass was published right before the war in Ukraine, it's a bit problematic. It's a bit problematic because the sense of urgency of many member states when coming together with this shared definition has changed, or at least the priorities or the main concern of some member states have changed. And probably the confrontation with Russia would figure much higher in the agenda, even if it figured already high in the agenda for some member states, would figure higher today than the moment the strategic compass was discussed. The strategic compass also had the big advantage of being let's say a bottom-up process compared to the global strategy, for instance, whereby there was a clear ambition of the then High Representative Mogherini to engage in the publication of the strategy, and it was very much driven by the institutions, particularly, of course, her office and the EAS, but also the Commission and so on and so forth. The strategic compass was much more bottom-up, so consultations with member states started right from the beginning. Low-hanging fruits were tried to be identified right from the beginning, and try to be a possibilistic, and I don't know if that word is correct, document, right? And see, okay, what can we do given these strategic differences? Where do we agree? Whereas, so this is not to say that the war in Ukraine has changed everything. Of course, it has changed the perception. It has changed the environment on which the strategic compass was adopted. It has not made the strategic compass irrelevant. That said, there is a bigger elephant in the room here, which is NATO, of course. And of course, the strategic compass, and here it's when it comes to the summit in Madrid and the adoption of the strategic concept of NATO. Of course, both the strategic compass of the EU and the strategic concept of NATO after Ukraine, after Madrid, sorry, both, and Ukraine, both speak about complementarity. Both speak about the EU and NATO being complementary, and none of them speaks about the EU being an autonomous actor, because the time when another Trump presidency comes, then we will need to be totally autonomous because we cannot rely on the US. This understanding of strategic autonomy, this understanding of EU foreign policy, I think is gone for a long time. We'll see what happens in 2024, but for the time being, this willingness of the EU to move its own way, and this disengagement of the US from traditional spheres of influence, such as Europe or confrontation with Russia, they are gone. I mean, they are gone at least for a couple of years. I don't know how long this will take, but the emphasis on complementarity is probably more necessary than ever. And I think that leaders, both in Europe and in the US, speak the complementarity language more and more often. And that is not bad news for the European Union, to be honest. I think it's necessary for the EU to identify the areas where this complementarity can be more useful and more win-win. And I fully agree with Anna here that what you need precisely is to identify those areas and see where the added value of your action is. And probably this is the framework we're at now, because bigger things are happening, rather than the ever-lasting discussion among ourselves and this self-referential discussion on how to engage with world affairs on the basis of autonomy, on the basis of... so this, I think, if you look at the wider picture, and if you look at the war in Ukraine under a wider framework and a more global outlook, no one out there really cares about the European Union having these discussions, to be honest. I think everyone cares, be the Americans or the rest of world powers, everyone cares about, okay, what are the geopolitical configurations going on? And this is where I think that the European Union can have a mature way of pursuing strategic autonomy by saying, okay, we align with the US on many things. We know the danger of Russia is real and very much perceived. We know confrontation with China and the reference of China in NATO, in the NATO concept for the first time ever is important. This is where things are going globally. What can we do about it? And thus, strategic compass is necessary, but the picture is much more, it's much bigger than our internal discussions, I would say.
Thank you very much, Paul. Aline, you mentioned also it needs buy-in of member states into and also contribution along their added values. And I mean, with regards to, you know, the conflict prevention and crisis management side of EU activities, do you think there will be also some progress now with regards to EU's engagement in other areas of conflict where we also see now maybe a competition with other global actors, namely, you know, in the Sahel region, where we see Wagner groups engaging and also, yeah, having a destructive effect on what the EU is trying to do with its missions. And will that maybe also help to bring together member states towards a joint goal in that respect?
So obviously none of these threats are new. I mean, those conflicts in the Sahel and in other parts of the southern neighborhood were there before the conflict in Ukraine, before the war in Ukraine, and actually they have, you know, they have been affected by some of the dynamics, some of the developments that we see emerging from the war in Ukraine. Obviously, we've seen, as it was mentioned earlier on, you know, food crisis and energy crisis, you know, the kind of increasing destabilization efforts by Russia in the Sahel and in the Middle East. So obviously, not only these conflicts are not going away, they're worsening as a result also of this global, but also localized war in Ukraine. And by the ripple effects of the war in this region, and obviously this provides, you know, this constitutes a challenge for the EU member states, but it also provides them with an opportunity, I would say. So I can also see how this could be a very important opportunity for the EU member states to strengthen their commitment and their engagement, both in military, but also in civilian crisis management. I mean, the EU has been involved in these areas already for a long time, but as I mentioned earlier on, one of the problems that we have seen here is the, you know, the very, you know, weak, and but also the fact that this commitment is not shared by all the member states, but that, for example, a large part of the EU member states are not really, only have very, very few contributions to civilian CSDP missions. So we've seen this kind of very unequal burden sharing among the EU member states when it comes to civilian crisis management, when it comes to conflict prevention, when it comes to mediation. So I think that perhaps this will be a kind of a wake-up call. I'm hoping that this is going to be the case. There's at the moment, for example, a new process that has been launched to reflect on the achievements of civilian CSDP, alongside the, you know, this was also part of the strategic compass, although the strategic compass focused mostly on the military side of things. There are references to, for example, the civilian side, but these references are very minimal. And you know, this is just it's just, you know, a way to say we need to do these things complementary and so on, but there's very little discussion of the civilian side on the strategic compass. But there's a new process that has been launched because we are now in the reviewing phase of what was called, this is another EU initiative, what was called the Civilian CSDP Compact. And that initiative that was launched a couple of years ago is coming to an end now, so they have to renew this initiative next year. And the interesting thing is that the discussion is focusing more on the strategic level again, which is interesting because for a long time, civilian CSDP has been working kind of in a zombie state of, change a couple of things here, a couple of things there, but there hasn't been enough kind of this discussion about the strategic purpose of a civilian CSDP. And perhaps the conflict, the war in Ukraine, and the conflicts that we see in the Sahel and in other areas might provide this kind of really wake-up call for the EU member states to start really thinking strategically about the use of these instruments that the EU has and where the EU has real strengths. So the discussion at the moment is about what do we want civilian CSDP to be about, how can this instrument complement other instruments that the EU has, think about the kind of the level of ambition, really. And once we agree on the level of ambition, then we can start thinking about what kind of capabilities do we need. So, for example, the member states might agree that actually we want less missions, but we want them more impactful missions. That could be one of the outcomes of this new reflection process. Or it could be something else. But I think this strategic reflection is overdue. And in that sense, the current context is really helping the member states to think about these issues. I do worry, however, that some member states might take the wrong lessons, or might learn the wrong lessons from the war in Ukraine, that they might decide that, we should just focus on the military side, that there's not enough, that we don't need to pay that much attention to civilian side, because obviously, the kind of threats that we face in the continent require, development of military capabilities and so on and so forth. But I think this would be a really missed opportunity, because as I show in the paper, and it's been discussed so far, this is where some of the EU's strengths lie. And I think it would be a really, faux pas to go down that route. I think also the war in Ukraine, some of the implications of the war also require for the EU to have a strong civilian capabilities in the area of security and defense. For example, once the war ends, obviously Ukraine will need help from the EU in terms of rebuilding its security sector. This is obviously even more important given the membership. The membership promise for Ukraine, the fact that the EU will have to help Ukraine to go down, and strengthen its democratic, institutions. So what we, we would expect to see, the redeployment of the EU advisory mission, for example. But this EU advisory mission will need much more resources than it had prior to the war in Ukraine. And obviously this will require more commitments, more resources coming from the member states. So yeah, I see some opportunities, but also some challenges. And as I said, some concerns that perhaps we might learn the wrong lessons from the conflict, perhaps.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, the wrong lessons, hopefully we won't. I would like now to open the floor and open also for questions and answers. We have one participant who would like to come in, and we have the possibility to open microphone and video. So please, if you could present yourself and then give your question. Patricia, do you hear us? Can you unmute yourself? And then you can pose your question. The hand is down again. Well, maybe we have a technical problem, I don't know. Otherwise, I would go to some of the questions from the chat. Well, there's quite a concrete question to you, Paul, about what it takes in regards to improve capabilities and also the control and command capabilities of the EU. Is there a prospect of integrating the Eurocorps into the founding treaties of the EU?
Well, perhaps Anna's better suited than me for that one. But in any case, the discussion that I would like to pick on is the famous treaty reform and adoption of decisions by QMV in foreign policy, and that includes, of course, all the traditionally blocking effects of unanimity in foreign policy, and that is a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, of course, there's the very natural response to this that, of course, you need unanimity to overcome unanimity, and thus any major change in the realm of foreign policy and defense decisions should go at the end of the road with a reform of the treaties, because the way that the treaties are understood and the way that member states have decided to work on foreign policy and defense matters always follows the logic of sovereignty and sovereign decisions of member states in this realm. And this is very different than other areas of EU integration, and this without major treaty reform, you cannot think about major overhaul of the way that decisions are taken. And that of course remains true and will remain so for some time to come. But the truth is that all the discussions on QMV in foreign policy necessarily depart from the idea that the current architecture is not only in foreign policy, in general, is not fit for purpose. And I would somehow disagree with that, because first, there are many areas in which you can overcome the treaties in a certain sense, the rigidity of the treaties by acting, be that through passerelle clauses or via informal mechanisms of decision taking, or by trying to flexibilize the way you take decisions and tasking the HRVP doing certain things on behalf of the member states, by contact groups, by many areas in which you can actually overcome the rigidity of unanimity and foreign policy mechanisms as they are written in the treaties. Also, there are very innovative frameworks that have been put forward as a consequence of the Ukraine war and after the pandemic as well, but particularly after the Ukraine war, that have not necessitated any major reform of the treaties. You have had the possibility to send weapons to a country, third country in conflict via the general budget of the European Union. And that is something that was totally probably unthinkable before the war. And that the pressure that the war puts on Europeans and that the political pressure that it puts on many member states has this reluctance to act, particularly in Germany, gone away because of the external threats and the external dynamics, not so much because of the internal discussions on whether we need treaty change or not. So for the time being, I would pursue a double road in this regard. Take the maximum advantage you can while you can with the current provisions. Leave the door open, on the other hand, for any major reform when time comes, and start preparing for that major reform. But for the time being, acknowledge that you can do many things if you have the political will to do them through the current framework, and you don't need major components or maybe drastic reforms at this point to pursue that path.
So hope for treaty change, or do deal with what you have at the moment, and integration of the Europe core. Do you see that?
Well, kind of alongside what along the lines of what Paul was saying, perhaps we don't need that kind of. I mean, whether it is possible or not, I don't think that there is the need for that kind of initiative, especially given that the Strategic Compass has just proposed this 5,000 troop rapid deployment force. So given that kind of proposal, obviously in the past we have also had big CSDP missions, military missions, including EU for Althea, that originally deploy up to 7,000 troops. So it's not that we don't have the instruments, just what Paul was saying, is that sometimes we don't have the political will to use them. So it's not a lack of instruments that we are facing, is a lack of political will. In the case of QMV, I completely agree with Paul that perhaps that's not the best way to go, and in particular because I don't think it will solve the problems, because what we face at the moment, for example, thinking about some of the vetoes that have been coming from Hungary, for example, regarding sanctions, this is not a problem of interest. This is a problem that the EU is facing because of this crisis of autocracy that we're facing at in Europe. So I don't think the problem is not QMV. The problem is a problem of democratic backsliding, in particular EU member states. So I don't think QMV is really going to get us anywhere unless we address the main problem, which is democracy in some of these countries. But so in terms of the military instrument that the EU has, I think there is a lot there that the EU can make use of. The same goes for the civilian side of things, for mediation, for peace building, for civilian crisis management. The instruments, the procedures are there, but what we're lacking at the moment is a political commitment from the member states to make full use of those instruments, to provide with high quality trained staff to be deployed in some of those missions. And what we're also lacking is some kind of political vision, that strategic vision about what are we doing with this instrument, which particular issues, in which particular areas the EU wants to be acting. Because at the moment we have very small commitments. We have 11 missions, for example, 11 civilian CSDP missions deployed in many different countries. Obviously, that shows the kind of the political visibility is there, but because they are so small and the impact of these missions is not as high as we would like it to be, I think in a way is undermining the kind of the role that the EU could play, and undermining some of the strengths of the EU in this particular area. So I think what is needed is political commitment, strategic vision, rather than more structures, more kind of treaty reforms, or more instruments to be made available.
And in what areas, in what concrete areas do you think, with the 27 member states that we have, can we achieve consensus and also a unified position, to progress a little bit with regards to strategic autonomy?
This is obviously the question. I mean, I think the strategic compass has been a really good exercise, and it kind of has at least helped with some of the discussion that we had earlier on about complementarity versus competition with the US and NATO. And I think obviously the strategic environment has also helped in this regard, kind of to clear the minds and to focus the kind of the vision. So we have already, that is a really important step for the member states, to show also their commitment to do more in this particular area. But there is still a lot of disagreements, as was mentioned earlier on by Paul, in terms of the strategic cultures of these countries, the strategic priorities. So at the moment, we still have a bit of a shopping list rather than a clear kind of agreed kind of list of priorities, and a hierarchy of priorities. That's going to be very difficult to achieve unless we are realistic about that among 27 EU member states. So perhaps I'm a bit pessimistic about these, but I don't expect them to, even with the next kind of reflection period, to really come up with a developed list of priorities as to where the EU could be acting, in which areas, in which countries. That's going to be very difficult to achieve, but also has to do with, obviously, we live in a very uncertain world, in a very complex world, so you don't want to be also tie yourself to very specific goals or priorities. So, obviously, I think, as I said, the EU has strong strengths in the area of mediation. It has achieved some successes in this area. So what we need is for the EU member states to provide the political backing to the EU, rather than kind of launching kind of parallel initiatives or kind of disengaging from this process. So that's would be one very important step to achieve. In the area of civilian CSDP, for them to fulfill the pledges that they have made. And in the area of resilience building, for the EU member states to not just focus on strengthening the capabilities of states, but also ensuring that they can prioritize also good governance, and also the accountability of the state security forces. So I think if they could achieve those three things, I think that would be really, really important.
Okay. Also with a view on the time, and also with the two sessions we will have tomorrow and on Thursday in mind, I will now maybe pass another last question to Paul, which is also in the chat about, the triangle between economy, technological and military capabilities. And how do you see that? How can this combination contribute to strategic autonomy, Paul? Because you mentioned it's not only about security and defense; it's so much wider. But how do you balance all these?
Yeah, no, it's certainly an external action understanding of strategic autonomy. It goes along the lines that the question is asking, and I agree. The big difficulty here, of course, is that there are different institutional mechanisms and decision-making mechanisms for all these areas, and you need to basically work on these different mechanisms for a same sense of purpose or a same sense of strategic direction. And this is when it becomes very complex, because some areas, of course, are more communitarian areas, and the Commission has the strongest say on these areas, on the implementation of these areas and policy mechanisms. On other areas, member states still have their most important decision-making tools and even the capabilities by themselves. So it's very difficult to put forward this external action architecture under a same direction. But in any case, what we are seeing is that there is a clear division of labor between superpower politics mechanisms today. Why? Because basically what we have thought for a long time is that deeper economic integration would help us achieve a common political understanding that the global scene, that cooperation is valuable. And this is something that Russia and China are both proving wrong, right? I mean, first you define your political and geopolitical goals, and then economy follows, or economic tools follow. So this is a major shift for the strategic dimension of foreign policy and the way you act on world affairs. So to be honest, it's the political discussions on how to pursue these economic objectives is something that we'll have to work on for the next few years, and also to make sure that we put forward, be in the digital sphere, in the military sphere, or any other that was or in the economic sphere, that we put forward the necessary frameworks for acting upon world politics. And this is very new for us. This is and this is very new for us Europeans, but in particular for specific countries within the European Union, that they have to change the mindset upon which they act on foreign policy matters. And it won't be easy. Of course, it won't be easy, but I don't know. I assume we'll have to work on it and make the best out of it. But probably we will need another session to discuss how to do it.
Yeah, and that session, and there I think you already lead to our session tomorrow on economy and trade. So thank you very much for doing my job. Well, in view of time, and as you all have to leave at 9:30 sharp, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us, Anna and Paul, to discuss your papers, but also go a little bit beyond that and also adapt your findings to, the changing geopolitical security environment. I would like to take the opportunity also to mention 2 other papers that have been written in this context of the working group on security and defense. A paper by Claudia Mayor and Alessandro Marano, which is posted already in the chat. It focuses on partnerships with regard to strategic autonomy, and also a paper by Sven Biskop, who focuses more on the integration of defense forces. Please join us also tomorrow for continuing the discussion on the economic side of autonomy, and also on Thursday and on technology and digital aspects. So have a nice day. Thanks for joining us again. And well, we're finishing 2 minutes earlier, but I think we can continue tomorrow and on Thursday. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.